Hello 801 colleagues, my name is Scott Misek and I'd like to take you on a 15-year leadership odyssey. The background for this trip is as follows. The setting is Barnes Jewish Hospital, located in St. Louis, Missouri. The time period is 2001 to present day. The problem is sepsis in patients who are afflicted with this condition. The team members in this case study are physicians, nurse practitioners, nurses, pharmacists, respiratory therapists, social workers, case coordinators, chiefs of departments, directors of divisions, and certainly chairs of committees. And our collective goal was to increase the survival of our patients with sepsis and certainly reduce costs for our medical center. A little bit of background about sepsis. It certainly is a deadly problem. For every 100 ICU admissions, there are approximately 14 septic shock cases. And of those 14 patients, 11 to 12 of them go on to have respiratory failure, which will require an artificial respirator. 4 of them will have a cardiac failure, necessitating either medication or some sort of device intervention. 5 of them will go on to have kidney failure, requiring dialysis of some sort. Ultimately, out of these 14 patients, 5 die during their ICU stay. 6 out of the 14 die within 1 month or 28 days. And ultimately, half of these patients die of septic shock and the complications that I mentioned. It was through personalistic reflection that we began to understand the reality of these outcomes for our patients. And we needed to go through this personalistic reflection in an attempt to design better treatment strategies that offered the best care possible for these patients. And with this understanding that I described for you, we were better able to garner support for change that obviously needed to be made. All of this occurred in 2001. You'll notice as we go along, I put the timeline for all of these different events and leadership examples in the upper right-hand corner of the slide. Well, after this personalistic reflection, we had to embark upon a technical reflection, which, as you read, ultimately led to a great self-awareness. Technical reflection, you'll recall, is benchmarking ourselves against externally imposed criteria. And in this case, it was the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, a national organization. And this group had put together a sepsis resuscitation and a sepsis treatment bundle. And as you can see here, there are 7 core measures that were delineated by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And you can see after benchmarking ourselves, we had very poor baseline performance. Core measure number 1 there, you can see we performed at 17% of the time. And all the way down at the bottom in some of these measures, we only had 2% and 5% achievement. So overall, a lot of room for improvement, and we became fully self-aware of our deficiencies. You know, at this time, I really called upon my ideation strength, as well as the ideation strengths of others, to develop a sepsis order set. You know, through the creation of the order set, we were able to connect different phases of treatment and turn what are really complex decision-making processes into relatively simple concepts. And what you can see here in the figure on the left is a representation of our sepsis antimicrobial therapy order set, which we really broke down for the physicians and nurse practitioners which were taking care of those patients. So something that was more simplistic. During this process, as Haslam and others describe, we really needed an in-group champion. And I stepped forward to fulfill this role because creating the order set was really the easy part. It was getting the buy-in from all the engaged parties that was really the challenge. And, you know, as this in-group leader, you know, I set forth to promote our group's efforts and what our vision was to those other parties around the hospital that had an interest or had a stake in the treatment of sepsis. And those involved the Critical Care Committee, the Antibiotic Utilization Committee, Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, and ultimately the Forms Committee. And from the development of the order set to the connection with these groups and the development of a social identity, if you will, it was really a 2-year process. Haslam, Riker, and Platow also discuss how leaders must craft a sense of us and are skilled entrepreneurs of identity. And I had to sell the story of what our sepsis team was comprised of, who we were, what we embodied, what our goals were, and how we needed all the nurses and physicians and pharmacists of the hospital to be a part of this group. So we engaged upon a educational effort whereby we held classes. You can see that nurses had 4-hour classes where we discussed what their roles would be and how they would be a vital part of this treatment process. We discussed with physicians over noon conferences and grand rounds how to utilize the order set. And ultimately the pharmacists, that they were the key components of this, and that they were delivering many of the necessary treatments and had to do so in a timely manner. And to do this, I really called upon my relator strength, where I emphasized that through this all, we share together, we risk together, we achieve together, and we fail together on behalf of our patients. And once we established this identity, we were able to go forward and implement this sepsis order set on a broader scale. And what we did, we really evaluated what our efforts were leading to. And so what I put here at the bottom of the slide are those 7 core measures that I mentioned from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And on the y-axis, the percent of patients where we achieved those goals set forth by that body. And you can see that after rolling out the sepsis order set in the blue bars, we dramatically improved the percentage of patients that we touched. And this did ultimately lead to improved outcomes. You can see here from this next slide that we had to use our analytical strengths, which was then coupled with a reflection on action. But before I get to that, I want to describe how we had improved through the creation of this sepsis team and this sepsis identity throughout the hospital. You can see here that our in-hospital mortality rates started out at 55%. And through our efforts, we were able to reduce them 15% all the way down to 40%. So this was a success story that was shared with all of those that were involved. But in terms of the analytical hat in me and my analytical strength, I really needed to see where we had made progress, to point us in the direction that we needed to go next. And much of our success were realized in patients that were treated in the emergency department or the ICU. You can see there that the before mortality rate was 62% and it had fallen over 20%. But it was in the patients that developed sepsis on the regular hospital wards outside of the ED or the ICU where we were not seeing improvements in their mortality rates. So this analytical reflection on action, if you will, is what propelled us forward and pointed us in the direction that we needed to go next in our treatment of patients with sepsis. And that led to deliberative reflection, where we had to gather input from a variety of sources. We had to learn from our own research and experience, as well as the research and experience and advice of others. And our new problem was related to having delays in identifying septic ward patients. And as a result of those delays in identification, we had delays in treatment. So the arranger strength was called upon, my arranger strength was called upon to gather the right group of people to make a proposed solution a reality. So at this point in time, we started to get outside of our scope of expertise. So we needed to expand our team, and that included bioinformaticians, biostatisticians, computer sciences, as well as reflecting upon the experiences that had taken place at the Mayo Clinic. Many of us had colleagues that had moved on to there, and they were engaged in the same processes that we were and had learned many things. And through deliberative reflection, our potential solution was the development of real-time alerts that were based on data from electronic medical records to identify patients that were on hospital wards. So with the help of our computer scientists and biostatistician colleagues, we developed an algorithm, which certainly I won't go through all of the details here, but you can see in the bottom through a number of different steps and iterations based on lab values and vital signs and things of that nature, we were able to identify in real time patients on the wards that were developing sepsis or septic shock. We then called on our informatics colleagues to make this algorithm into something that was readily usable. So again, the arranger strength, putting people in the best position to put together an outcome that benefits our patients. So the blue side is what our computer scientist friends did in terms of using all of that data to identify cases. And then it was the informatics group which built that algorithm into an alert, which sent a direct page to a nurse who then saw that patient instantaneously, identified the appropriate physician, and then decided if an intervention were to take place. And you can see this process led us all the way up to 2008. So we're well into our journey here of leadership in various ways. And ultimately, like I've shown you before, this was a success. It ended up in faster care of ward patients. We collected this data over a year's time, and while the different entities on the x-axis are not important, you can see that after the sepsis alert was implemented, you can see increased percentages in all of those different markers, all those different measures, which ultimately led to improved outcomes in our patients. Well, where have we gone from here? This is where I've called on my maximizer strength, that continuous quest for excellence through refinement of the processes that we have undergone, through refinement of our strengths, through all those different processes of leadership which I've described. And over the past 5 years, we've invested time in creating a mobile sepsis team, a group of clinicians that upon getting this alert goes to the patient's bedside and initiates even more rapid care than the nurses were able to do. We've worked with our informatics team and championed smart antibiotic prescribing. But I think most importantly, we've invested in love-driven leadership. We've expanded our team. We've really focused on developing others who have a passion for this, and hopefully the efforts will carry forward long after we have moved on from this endeavor. And I think in summary, this really captures all of the Ignatian pillars that Loney described: self-awareness, ingenuity, love, and heroism, and all of the different alerts and research and collaborations with different individuals that I've described. And then we put all of these things into action by practicing the Ignatian pedagogy, the context of sepsis and our experience in treating these patients, reflecting on how to improve all those different methods, whether it be technical or deliberative or reflection on action, and then ultimately using those reflections to come up with some sort of answer or some sort of action, and then evaluating what we've done. Did it improve the care of our patients? Do we need to take a step backwards to take a step forwards? And then ultimately gathering ourselves again in the treatment of patients with sepsis. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this leadership odyssey, a 15-year leadership odyssey. I look forward to your comments, and I look forward to the next semester with you all. Thanks.